Today, we're going to dive into a pretty radical idea, and it's one that didn't show up with a huge explosion, but with a really quiet, personal invitation. It's a story that seriously challenges how we think about goodness and shows us how one single moment can, quite literally, change the world. Let's get into it. You know, the biggest changes, the ones that really transform everything, they almost never start with a big spectacle. They usually begin small, like a whisper. A single invitation that creates ripples nobody could have ever seen coming. All right, so our story kicks off in a place that was basically the definition of social and spiritual shame. And we're focused on one man, a guy named Levi. He's just sitting there at his tax booth, which, believe me, was way more than just a piece of office furniture back then. Yeah, this booth wasn't just a workplace. It was a massive, glaring symbol of corruption, of betrayal. See, tax collectors worked for the Roman Empire, the occupying force, and they often got rich by exploiting their own people. So to sit at that booth meant you were a traitor, an outcast, someone everyone saw as totally compromised. And it's to this guy, in this place of all places, that Jesus walks up and says just two simple words: "Follow me." That's it. No long sermon, no lecture about his job, no 3-month probation period. Just a direct and honestly a pretty stunning invitation. And Levi's response is just as stunning. It's immediate. It's total. He gets up and leaves everything. I mean everything. His income, his security, his entire identity, all of it, just left behind in an instant. He had no clue what was coming next. He just knew he had to answer that call. And that one moment, that single act of getting up, was going to change everything. So what's the very first thing Levi does after walking away from his old life? He doesn't go on some quiet spiritual retreat. No, he throws a huge party. And this celebration, well, it immediately sparks a massive conflict over the very meaning of holiness. Now, when the religious leaders ask this question, you gotta understand they're not actually curious. This is an accusation. They are completely scandalized because in their world, holy people absolutely do not mix with unholy people. So, what's really going on here? What we're seeing here is a head-on collision between two completely opposite worldviews. On one side, you have the Pharisees, who see holiness as this incredibly fragile thing. It has to be protected, put behind walls, because they believe sin is contagious. So you have to isolate yourself. But Jesus comes along with this totally different idea, that holiness is actually strong, it's powerful, it's redemptive. He acts like grace is more contagious than sin, so the goal isn't to isolate, but to engage. Jesus' response here just completely reframes his entire mission. He's not denying that people are sick with sin. He's redefining the purpose of holiness with this incredible metaphor. I mean, think about it. What good is a doctor who refuses to see sick people? So it really boils down to this question. Is holiness a possession you're supposed to guard, or is it a purpose you're supposed to fulfill? Is it like a priceless museum artifact that you have to keep behind glass, pure and untouched? Or is it like powerful medicine that's meant to be administered to the people who are actually sick? Jesus is arguing it's the medicine. Holiness isn't weakened by getting close to brokenness. It's the very thing that can heal it. And what's so cool about Levi's story is that his actions actually give us this really practical, repeatable model for this new connected kind of holiness. It's like he left us a blueprint for transformation. The blueprint is pretty simple, just 3 parts. First, surrender. That's leaving the booth. Second, hospitality, setting the table. And third, connection, extending the invitation to others. Let's break those down. Okay, so step 1 is surrender. Levi had to physically get up and walk away from his tax booth, right? You can't start walking down a new path if you're still sitting in the old one. And that leads to a pretty big question for us. Where is your booth? You know, our booths can be all sorts of things that we cling to for our identity or our security. It could be our comfort zone, our reputation, our need to be in control of everything. It could even be our status, our financial security, or, and this one's tricky, our own self-righteousness. It's whatever we have to get up and leave to really follow a new way of life. Levi's second step, hospitality, is just wow. It's so profound. He didn't grab a microphone to preach at his friends. He set a table to eat with them. This isn't just about faith, by the way. This is a powerful model for any kind of social change. Real influence so often begins with presence, not persuasion. It starts by sharing a meal, not by winning an argument. So, what happened in the long run? What was the actual legacy of Levi's simple, split-second yes? What became of the guy who walked away from that tax booth and decided to throw a party? Okay, you have to get this, because this is where the story becomes absolutely mind-blowing. The man we've been calling Levi is the very same person history knows as Matthew. Yes, that Matthew, the social outcast, the traitor, becomes the author of one of the most influential books in human history, the Gospel of Matthew. The tax collector is the guy who wrote down the Sermon on the Mount. It's just incredible. I mean, just look at that ripple effect. It all started with one call. That single call led to a banquet. That banquet and the new life it represented became a testimony. That testimony was eventually written down as a gospel. And that gospel has gone out to the nations, all from one personal decision to just get up. If this story shows us anything, it's that the greatest movements aren't built on the most impressive resumes. They're built on surrendered hearts. Levi wasn't qualified. He was the last person anyone would have picked, but he was available. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Your willingness to say yes is so much more powerful than any ability you think you have or don't have. And so, the story of Levi leaves us with a pretty powerful challenge. Is the goodness in our lives something we guard for ourselves, like a museum exhibit? Or is it something we share for the healing of others, like medicine? Because chances are, someone right near you might be just one invitation away from a transformation that could, quite literally, change the world.